You're too smart to join a cult. You've built companies. You understand complex systems. You can dissect an argument in seconds. You've spent your life being rewarded for critical thinking. That's exactly why he's going to win. The most successful cult leader of the 21st century didn't find you in a commune. He found you in your feed. He didn't build a compound. He built an algorithm. You're a CEO. Your bank account has 7 figures. Your LinkedIn profile looks like a monument to success. But at 2 a.m., scrolling through Instagram, you feel like an empty room. Then the algorithm surfaces him. Young, tan, speaking quantum physics like poetry. He tells you your intelligence is a cage. You don't just follow him, you begin to worship him. This is the story of Bentinho Massaro and how a private jet, a quantum physics textbook, and a glass of expensive scotch led to the total annihilation of the human ego. Bentinho Massaro doesn't recruit through fear or hellfire. He recruits through your resume. His content algorithmically targets high achievers through a specific pipeline. Wellness leads to manifestation. Manifestation leads to quantum consciousness. Quantum consciousness leads to him. The algorithm learns what you're hungry for. Then, it feeds you the next level up. The language is the trap. Vibrational frequency, path of least resistance, observer collapse, quantum superposition. It sounds like science. It feels like discovery. It bypasses the part of your brain that would normally ask, what does any of this actually mean? Former followers describe it as an intellectual high, like they'd stumbled onto secret knowledge unavailable to lower vibration people. One woman said it felt like being let into a private club, where everyone spoke a language that proved they were smarter than the rest of the world. But here's what was actually happening. Bentinho wasn't teaching physics. He was teaching you to distrust your own perception and replace it with his. He'd say things like, particles explore all possible paths simultaneously in superposition. They collapse into one reality based on the observer's vibrational output. Your consciousness determines which path the universe takes. It's not that it's entirely false. It's that it's just true enough to sound credible, then twisted into something unrecognizable. Quantum mechanics does involve observation affecting outcomes, but in actual physics, observation means measurement, not sentient intention. Bentinho fills that gap with, your vibration chooses the path. Suddenly, you're not learning science. You're learning that reality bends to his interpretation of your consciousness. And if you're intelligent, educated, successful, that's not protection. That's the handle he uses to pull you in. The sophistication paradox works like this. You've spent your life being rewarded for understanding complex systems. Your brain has been trained to recognize patterns, decode complexity, find signal in noise. You've built companies, managed teams, solved problems other people couldn't. So, when someone presents you with a framework that feels complex, layered, intellectually demanding, you assume it must be real. You don't realize that cognitive overwhelm is the point. Former followers describe watching 10 hours of his content in a day, trying to get it, trying to reach the level of understanding he kept dangling just out of reach. One man said, I felt like if I just watched one more video, it would all click, but it never did, so I kept watching. That's not education, that's dependency. Bentinho would look into the camera and say things like, you are God, but you haven't realized it yet. I have won. It's the mirror seduction. He's not telling you you're broken, he's telling you you're divine, but only he can show you how to access it. And the stakes? He'd say, by 2035, we'll have a fully enlightened civilization. You can either be part of the evolution or stay trapped in the illusion. The choice wasn't follow me or don't. The choice was ascend or be left behind in a reality. Think about what that does to someone. You're already successful by every external measure, but he's telling you that success is the cage, that your intelligence is the problem, that everything you've built is just ego scaffolding, and the only way out is through him. Former followers report feeling like they'd finally found someone who understood them, someone operating on a frequency they'd been searching for their whole lives, their ability to trust their own mind. But the real trap wasn't what he taught, it was what he erased. Bentinho's core teaching wasn't complicated. There is no self, there is no world. He'd repeat it in live streams, in retreats, in private sessions, until it stopped sounding like philosophy and started sounding like fact. Former followers describe what happened next. They started losing the ability to distinguish between their thoughts and his voice, between their feelings and ego resistance, between harm and awakening. One woman said, "I stopped being able to tell if I was hungry or if hunger was just an illusion." Another said, "When my partner left me, I couldn't feel sad. I'd been taught there was no me to lose anything. So I just sat there, numb, telling myself I was enlightened." This isn't enlightenment. It's depersonalization, identity diffusion. Clinical terms for what happens when the brain's sense of self begins to fragment, when reality stops feeling real, when you can't locate yourself inside your own life anymore. Bentinho presented this as the goal. In one archived live stream, he says, "You don't exist. That pain isn't real. There is no person who suffers. You're struggling, you're in pain, you reach out for help, and you're told that's just your ego trying to survive. The best thing you can do is let it die, so you stop asking for help. You stop believing your feelings are real. And when things get worse, when you lose your job, your grip on what's true, you're told that's progress." Former followers report abandoning careers because work is just ego, cutting off families because they're operating at a lower vibration, sitting in rooms for hours, believing they were dissolving into the infinite. One man described it like this: "I felt like I was watching my life happen to someone else. I couldn't make decisions anymore because there was no me left. So I just waited for Bentinho to tell me what reality was." That's the trap. Once your sense of self dissolves, there's only one voice left to trust. His. Bentinho didn't need to control his followers' behavior. He just needed to convince them they didn't exist. Because if you don't exist, you can't be harmed. You can't make choices. You can't leave. And when people around you start to worry, when friends say you're not yourself anymore, when family begs you to get help, you've already been taught that their concern is just proof they're still trapped in. Bentinho would say, "The world will call you crazy. That's how you know you're waking up." Distress became evidence of progress. Deterioration became enlightenment. And the clinical danger? Reality testing the ability to distinguish between what's real and what's not. Emotional invalidation became a spiritual practice. Help-seeking became a sign of weakness. And dissociation, the thing that happens when the mind can't handle what's happening to it, as the highest state of consciousness a human being could reach. One former follower said it best: "I didn't lose myself to Bentinho. He convinced me I never existed in the first place." And once your sense of self dissolved, there was only one voice left to trust. Once the mind is hollowed out, it needs a place to be filled. For Bentinho's followers, that place was a town built on the very energy they were taught to crave. In 2017, Bentinho moved his operation to Sedona, Arizona, red sandstone cliffs rising like temples from the desert floor. A town famous for spiritual vortices and people searching for something beyond the material world. It was the perfect stage. What started as online followership began consolidating into something physical, a semi-closed spiritual community forming around him. Followers relocated, restructured their lives, built their schedules around his live streams, his interpretation of reality. Former insiders describe what happened next. Social contraction. The outside world, the unenlightened world, became something to avoid. Interests outside the community started feeling irrelevant. One woman said, "I stopped talking to anyone who wasn't part of the group. Not because Bentinho told me to, because everyone else just seemed asleep. Like they were living in a dream and didn't know it." That's the environmental mechanic of influence. You don't need a compound. You don't need locked doors. You just need to make the world outside feel spiritually inferior to the world inside. And Bentinho accelerated it. He'd post about critics, calling them part of the average American cult, people indoctrinated by media, scared of anything outside their own experience, ready to attack what they didn't understand. He'd frame doubt as lower consciousness, leaving as choosing spiritual death. Stay, and you're evolving toward the 2035 enlightened civilization. Leave, and you're regressing back into the illusion. You're technically free to go, but psychologically, leaving means annihilating your own spiritual progress. It means admitting you were wrong, that you wasted years, so people stayed. Even when things stopped making sense. even when the luxury started feeling like a contradiction. Because while Bentinho taught that money doesn't exist and the material world is illusion, he was living in penthouses, flying private jets, hosting retreats at high-end international resorts that cost followers thousands of dollars to attend. Former members describe the cognitive dissonance. How can he say money isn't real while charging $1,200 for a retreat? How can he teach non-attachment while posting photos of designer watches? He's operating on a plane we can't understand yet. The contradiction is the teaching. Your confusion became proof of his enlightenment. One man said, "I convinced myself that if I couldn't understand why he needed a private jet to teach about transcending the ego, I wasn't awake enough yet." That's the trap. The more it doesn't make sense, the more you believe you're the problem. And in Sedona, with the community tightening and Bentinho's voice becoming the only voice that mattered, followers lost their last external reference points. Because reality was whatever he said it was. But the most powerful control wasn't his presence, it was his absence. Bentinho had a pattern. He'd be everywhere, live streaming daily, posting constantly, responding to comments, holding Q and as, and then he'd vanish. No explanation, no warning. Former followers describe what happened during those absences. Panic, obsessive checking, refreshing his pages, searching for clues in old videos, creating elaborate theories about where he went and why. Some convinced themselves he was ascending to higher dimensions. Others thought he was testing their faith. One woman said, "When he disappeared, I'd watch his old videos on repeat. I'd pause on his face and try to feel his presence. I know how that sounds, but I needed him." In psychology, it's one of the most powerful tools for creating dependency. Constant presence creates comfort, but unpredictable presence creates obsession. Rats in labs will press a lever more frantically when the reward comes randomly than when it comes every time. Slot machines work on this principle. And Bentinho, whether he knew it or not, had perfected it. He'd disappear for weeks, then return with a cryptic post. "I've been integrating at levels you can't imagine," and his followers would flood back, re-energized, recommitted, convinced his absence meant something profound. The meaning-making around his silence became its own form of devotion. But here's the contradiction that made it even more powerful. In his teachings, Bentinho would say things like, "I'm not a teacher, don't follow me." He'd position himself as just another seeker, just someone sharing his experience, no different from anyone else. He was the only one who could interpret reality, the only one who understood the absolute, the only one whose consciousness had reached the frequency necessary to guide others. Former followers describe the bind this created. He'd say, "Don't follow me," so if you questioned him, you were told you were still following, but if you stopped engaging, you were abandoning the path. He got all the power of being a guru, total interpretive control, financial support, devotional following without any of the responsibility. If someone deteriorated under his teachings, that wasn't his fault. He'd already said, "Don't follow me." If someone spent their savings on his retreats and ended up financially ruined, that wasn't his problem. He'd already said, "Money doesn't exist." If someone lost their grip on reality, that wasn't a failure of his methods, that was them. Multiple ex-members have publicly described the consequences. Spending thousands, career abandonment, housing instability, psychological decompensation, relationships destroyed, families fractured. And when they tried to speak up, they were met with, "You're just trapped in victim consciousness." One man said, "I lost everything following his teachings. And when I finally left, I couldn't even blame him. Because he'd spent years teaching me that there was no me to be harmed and no him to cause harm." That's the final layer of the trap. Even after you leave, you can't locate responsibility because the system already taught you not to trust your own perception. And when the consequences became undeniable, the system had already taught them not to trust their own perception. This cycle of presence and absence didn't just create obsession, it broke the final circuit breaker of the human psyche, the ability to recognize harm. People didn't fall for Bentinho Massaro because they were weak, they fell because he trained them to distrust their own minds. That's the counterintuitive lesson here. The most dangerous cult tactic isn't control. It's dissolving the part of you that could recognize harm. Former followers describe it the same way. I lost the ability to know what was real. Intelligent people, successful people, people who'd built careers on critical thinking, on analyzing data, on making sound decisions under pressure. And they all reported the same thing. Their ability to trust their own perception disappeared. One woman, a former lawyer, said, "I used to argue cases in front of judges. I could dissect an argument in seconds. But with Bentinho, I couldn't tell anymore if I was being manipulated or if I was just resisting enlightenment." That's the sophistication trap completed. Your critical thinking doesn't protect you, because every time you question something, you're told, that's just your ego trying to survive. Every time you feel uncomfortable, you're told, that's resistance to awakening. Every time reality stops making sense, you're told, good, that means the illusion is breaking down. So you stop trusting the part of your brain that says, something's wrong here. You stop trusting your instincts. And Bentinho's interpretation becomes your only anchor. Clinical breakdown. This is attachment-based cult dynamics. Regression under perceived authority. Cognitive dependency that mirrors early childhood development when you had to rely on someone else to tell you what reality was. Bentinho recreated that state in adults, and the digital amplification made it worse. Unlike physical cults, his reach was unlimited, were algorithmically funneled toward his content. The platforms learned what you were searching for, meaning, purpose, transcendence, and served you the next step in the pipeline. Wellness content led to manifestation content. Manifestation led to consciousness content. Consciousness content led to Bentinho. And once you were in, the algorithm kept you there. Autoplay cued the next video. Recommendations surfaced related content. YouTube's sidebar became a curated shrine. Instagram's explore page learned your spiritual hunger. The feed became an echo chamber where his voice was the only voice. But here's what made it more insidious than a physical compound. The algorithm personalized your isolation. It didn't just remove outside voices. It made sure you never encountered them in the first place. Your feed became a custom-built reality where Bentinho's worldview was the only worldview, where doubters and critics were algorithmically filtered out before you even knew they existed. One man said, "I'd fall asleep watching his videos and wake up 6 hours later with another one playing." Another described it as algorithmic grooming. The platforms learning exactly which hooks kept you engaged, then serving you more of the same until there was no mental space left for anything else. And it worked because the algorithm doesn't ask if content is true or harmful. Bentinho's videos had high retention rates, long watch times, strong engagement metrics. To the platform that made him good content, to his followers that made him God. Bentinho is still active online, still recruiting through platforms like Massaro University, still promising what he's always promised. A shift in identity from which you can't recover. That phrase, a shift in identity from which you can't recover. Multiple former followers have spoken publicly. Some have formed recovery groups. Others have written detailed accounts of financial loss, psychological harm, relationship destruction. But for every person who leaves, the algorithm finds 10 more. Because this isn't just about one guru, it's about how digital platforms weaponize spiritual hunger. They don't care if the content is healing or harmful, and Bentinho's content is very, very engaging. Intellectually seductive language, promises of transformation that feel just within reach. The algorithm can't tell the difference between a meditation teacher and a manipulator. It just knows you watched for 20 minutes. So, it serves you more. And somewhere right now, someone is scrolling at 2 a.m., successful on paper, empty inside, searching for something that makes sense of the gap between what they've achieved and how they feel. And the algorithm is about to introduce them to a 30-year-old man, which brings us back to you. The danger isn't out there in some desert compound. It's at 2 a.m., in your feed, speaking your language, targeting the exact shape of your emptiness. And here's what makes it more terrifying than any physical cult. The algorithm didn't just find Bentinho for you, it learned what you were hungry for. It tracked every pause, every replay, every moment you lingered on a video, promising you could transcend the gap between who you are and who you think you should be. It knows you're successful, but feel hollow. It knows you're intelligent, but feel lost. It knows exactly which words will make you stop scrolling and start surrendering. And right now, it's looking for the next one, the next guru, the next voice that sounds just credible enough to bypass the part of your brain that would normally say, "This doesn't make sense." Bentinho Massaro is still recruiting, still promising a shift in identity from which you can't recover, to people who look exactly like you did before you learned. But he's not the only one. The same algorithmic intimacy that made Bentinho feel like he was speaking directly to your soul, it's being weaponized by others who understand that spiritual hunger is the most profitable vulnerability on the internet. Teal Swan built an empire on it. She doesn't use quantum physics. She uses trauma. She doesn't promise enlightenment. She promises healing. Dissolve your ability to trust yourself. Then become the only voice you can trust. Watch that investigation next. Because the algorithm isn't just hunting for Bentinho's next follower. It's hunting for yours, and it already knows which pain to target.